It's the State of the Dungeon! It's a video that Rob does about his games. Yeah! Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Rob, and this is another State of the Dungeon address. This is for the game that took place in Mighty Protectors, Villains of Vigilantes 3.0, on the night of December 3rd, 2020. We did not have all players in attendance. We were missing the player Rook, which meant that we are down to 3 players with Cyghost, Bulwark, and Sentinel in attendance. And we took up gameplay with the characters meeting with several high-up members of Brass. 2 of them generals in complete uniform, and 1 just a gentleman wearing a suit. These people were revealed to be a high-ranking general from the Pentagon, somebody, the second in command, high-seated up in the Task Force to Space Force, directed from the Air Force. And the last person was an Agent Carver, a man so deep in the CIA that most people, even in the CIA, don't know who he is and what his current mission is. But he has a great deal of respect from their personal contact, and Veronica seems to think very highly of him. So, all in all, they were given a sales pitch. Basically, you can work for us part-time. You don't have to become full members of the team that we're trying to put together, but we need to know that you're not going to go around just raising hell. If we need you for something important, for saving the world or saving the nation or something like that, we need to know that we can count on you. If you agree to that, we can give you an identity that it'll be legally binding. You can do whatever you want in it, have a credit rating, arrest record, whatever is going to be on that identity, not your own. And basically you'll be operating under our sanction. If you step out of line, you break the law, you're on your own cognizance there, and we will shut you down. But for the most part, this will allow you to be a superhero. You can do the kind of things that you'll be freed up to try to save people, to try to make things better, use your powers for good. If you can abide by those rules, we really don't have a problem with you. So the group effectively said yes. They signed off on the papers that Carver gave them. The generals were pleased enough and left the offer open that if they want to become more full-time members of a government-backed agency, that the offer is open. They would be given a effective rank in the military and access to more resources. But until then, they'll be taken care of when they are called upon to do missions. They'll be given transportation, equipment, whatever, commensurate to whatever they're doing. Along the way, they did get some information out of them. They found out that this group is from an organization that has been around for quite a few years, ever since the Cold War, basically with the purpose of protecting the world against superweapons. Not just nuclear either. They've been ready for pandemic responses, although not something like coronavirus. They're talking about targeted bioweapon pandemics that can be targeted to destabilize the world and eradicate entire populations with relative safety to other parts of the world. They're prepared against, chemical introduction that could cause some serious problems, as well as the possibility of nuclear terrorism. So, this group takes this very seriously, and they have international mandate. There's several people in different layers of different government agencies that have formed this kind of shadow cabal for generally purposes that most people can live with. This isn't to prop up a regime. This is strictly to make sure that the world stays safe from these kind of threats. So Veronica is fairly solid with them. She knows of their existence, and she knows that they're generally pretty decent people. She also knows they're one security level above all those folk in black who they've been having a problem with, that kind of set up the Shadow Council to try to control all of the gifted that they've been fighting against. They now have a group above them who kind of can give them information about what they're doing, and so they can stop them or try to help out other gifted that this group is targeting. So they're generally okay with the scenario. This also means that the group as a whole gets a lump sum of money so that they can further enhance their home base, which they're tired of calling the bunker. They really want to turn it into something else. They've kind of toyed with the castle. They were also given control of the above ground land officially, so now it is private property that they can enhance and develop. So far they haven't made any great requests themselves on what they want to do, but Veronica is going to help them develop. Also, that comes with the alternate identities are that they're given some sort of home, some sort of house that is tax-free that they can go to use when they want to use their cover identity. And they can pick wherever it's going to be, what state and county, and then they can make sure they get something tasteful but not overly extravagant, because they've got that kind of pull. So the group in general has that settled. Now that Muscles isn't there causing extra conflict with the government, it's smoothed their path. If Muscles ever comes back, it'll be interesting, but as of right now, the group is fairly well set. It didn't take very long, only a day, and some occasional banter between the other superpowered individuals who share their group, mostly picking on the ninja when the ninja started getting a little, well, lippy with them, demonstrating that, in his limited offense, he can be somewhat dangerous. He was actually managed to hurt Bulwark through all of his defenses. So he does have some offensive ability, and he does have amazing reflexes, but it's not foolproof, and he's still not up to taking on the rest of the team. And also they talk to Dr. Terrible, who, again, his only idea was basically to rip off Dr. Horrible, their tech gadget guy, and they both are kind of hopeless. They don't have the spark of being heroes, and while they're working on developing their abilities for the most part, they are kind of sidelining themselves to being second fiddle to everybody else because they don't take everything seriously. Unlike Extra Crispy. Extra Crispy is what the flaming chicken has picked for his name. He has the ability to wreath himself in flame and cover parts of his body up in fires. He can't project them. He doesn't have the same abilities that, say, Firebrand has. But he's, in his limited scope, he's got some interesting things going on with his powers, most of them offensive. He has, however, developed the ability to absorb energy attacks that are incoming. This does prove to be useful. And when he does his fire sheath, it actually absorbs energy attacks of all sorts, which can be very, very handy. And then finally, the leisure suit guy is now calling himself Doorman. And he's, the group has found out that he's actually quite useful and has figured out how to use his ability to create doors and windows in combat sense, sending people far away so that they're not in a fight anymore. Got a lot of interesting abilities and certainly can teleport several people through a gate to, well, fairly close range, but still can be very, very useful in the right circumstances. But he himself is somewhat hopeless in terms of fighting. He's basically an unmodified human in a fight with no other offensive abilities than to create his gates and windows. And while he's working on that, he's just not the kind of person that you want to take along on relatively dangerous missions. So the group was approached by Carver with a mission that they were offered, basically to help out a gifted who was on some very, very powerful organizations' list because of the danger that he potentially could pose. His name is Mohammed Asin. He's a citizen in Iraq who has a number of family members who have fallen victim to violence and might very well have an axe to grind. He also has, strangely enough, the gifted ability to detonate himself in a large, powerful explosion and then to reform himself several seconds later. How often he can do this and how powerful it is still unknown, but it is known that he's profiled as the kind of person who could very easily join one of these groups with a serious, serious problem with other people that he thinks may have wronged them and resort to, killing innocents and doing a great deal of damage with his abilities. So they wanted to head that off. They thought they would give the group a chance to go and talk with him first. Shut him down if need be, but deal with him in a way that hopefully won't get him to turn like that. It's a bit softer approach than they've been offered prior, and the group seemed to be okay with that, with the idea that they can go and actually approach somebody without going in guns blazing, which has been kind of their MO so far. So they were given tickets, they were given resources, and a translator who would meet them in Baghdad. The tickets were to take them overseas to Spain, to Cairo, to Baghdad. And from there, they would go out to Tikrit, a small town out in Iraq that is the homeland of Muhammad. So they agreed because they want to help this guy, and or at least make sure he's not dangerous. And they took all the gear they were offered. They also now have some nice low-profile body armor that protects as well as the stuff that they were wearing when they were working with good old Warbridge. However, it's a little bit bulkier and not as fancy. That may come later. But they flew without any real incident to Spain. They flew to Cairo. And at Cairo, they did a little information. They went and they checked out the newspaper to see what was going on, because they knew that Warbridge's Alpha team had already gone to Cairo on some mission. And they found out that only a couple of things, a little investigation, but they found out three things. Number one, that there was some sort of a mass hysterical event in the southeast corner of the city on the banks of the Nile. It seemed to match some of the influence that Samidi seems to have with people, whipping them into thinking that the dead were rising, and with Samidi that is possible. So that was a red flag. They also found that in a museum in Cairo that several Sumerian idols had been stolen. Not the most valuable things in the museum, which made their loss kind of puzzling. But no clues, no traces were revealed at this point. So again, if this was something that Warbridge had something to do with, they couldn't really guess at exactly what purpose it had. They also found a book released by the Al Jazeera Press that details the gifted that have revealed themselves so far and the phenomena, to try to give people a sense of, how things are going on. So I decided to let them have this as a resource so that they could kind of track how things are going. And wouldn't you know it, the group is like in the top 6 people that have revealed themselves so far, or are known to people. So instantly, they have a little notoriety, which can be good sometimes. So they met up with their driver in Baghdad, and he is a savvy person who knows the area. His mother was Iraqi, but his father, as it turns out, was British, and he is willing to work with Western agencies to kind of be a native person with their eyes and ears. And he's pretty savvy about living in Iraq and doing okay. He knows where the threats are. He knows how the different structures of power are arranged, how much control the West still has over Iraq and their budding kind of democracy. So they got a kind of a tense tour out of Baghdad as Adam, is his name, took care of all of the different issues that were presenting themselves to get them out of town without a problem, and he did his job quite well. They eventually drove to Makkat, a small city, about most of the way, a couple hours out of town, passing through several checkpoints along the way, so that they could resupply, they could eat, and be ready to move forward towards Tikrit. And when they went there, they wanted to try some local food, which it turns out that Adam is very conversant with the city and took them to a place where they were able to eat. I felt somewhat bad because my knowledge of Middle Eastern culture and cuisine is not great, so I basically hand-waved that through a bit. It's just not something that I'm comfortable trying to voice myself off to relate a realistic experience of that, which is unfortunate. I really wish I could be more of a world traveler and be able to fully bring things like that to life, but alas, I'm not that. But they ate well, and when they went out, there was an explosion a few blocks away. And being heroes, Adam's like, well, understand that they are they have superpowers and they may have this superhero complex thing going on. And he's like, well, if you want to do something. So they all ran towards the source of the explosion, as proper heroes with superpowers would do. And they weren't the stealthiest. Sentinel tried. He tried. Sentinel tried a lot of things. And now we're going to have an interlude where I talk about the nature of luck. Now, I am a firm believer, somewhat. I used to be a firm believer that these are random number generators. When these dice are made well, every time you roll, there's an equal chance that all the different sides, any one of those could come up and give you a result, meaning it's random. I don't think I believe that anymore. Because I have seen some of the worst luck ever down here in this basement. And it floats. It's not always the same person, but somebody is going to get dumped on by fate every night. Tonight, it was Sentinel's turn. The only time he really made rolls, a couple of rolls he made, but for the most part, horrible. A couple of 20s, despite the fact that he's quite competent in a lot of the things he's trying. Nope. He was having all sorts of troubles. On the other hand, Bulwark was rolling very well and succeeded far more often than he failed. And things kind of went 50-50 with Saigo. Sometimes she did fairly well, sometimes disastrously. So they got out into the back alleys of Makhet looking for these terrorists, and wouldn't you know it, they were already engaging an Iraqi security force, which they had ambushed. The Iraqis were not doing so well. And they came up behind the terrorists. Since they weren't stealthy, they had a chance for a quick resolve the whole thing. But instead what happened was the terrorists turned, spun, and started shooting. Well, they tried to shoot a Sentinel. That's a lost cause because Sentinel's very good at the defense. They did manage to wing Saigos, but her armor held. And they flattened some ammo against Bulwark, but Bulwark had his density up, and yeah. Simple bullets can't harm Bulwark very often. So the group went and just basically deconstructed them. A blow-by-blow isn't really necessary. At this point, a group of 6 terrorists are nothing for the group to deal with, as skilled as they are. And they were also treated to the benefit of working alongside of Extra Crispy, who has developed his skill to the point where he can actually walk up to somebody with their guns, reach out, grab their guns, ignite his hand, and melt their guns, which he demonstrated by disarming 2 of the terrorists and basically ending up destroying all their guns afterwards. Now, they were coming to the aid of these Iraqi security forces who were trying to fight back but were in shell shock. They were in bad shape. When the group came through, they just started clearing house. This time, however, they had to be a little bit more subtle because it was pretty clear that many people in this town didn't particularly like Americans, and some of them may be superstitious about the superpowers. So some of them were trying to hide their powers. Sentinel, for instance, was trying to go for close-range force blasts so that he wouldn't demonstrate these beams coming out, which failed once, but when he hit, it was like hitting a haymaker that sent the guy up all the way up onto the roof and knocked him completely cold. Bulwark came through and just threw a punch into a guy's stomach that just bent him over, knocked him out, got him sick, just devastating punch. And Psyghost, well, power blasts? Fine. Wasn't the most, or no, paralyzing ray, I'm sorry, not a power blast. Her paralyzing ray worked. Suddenly she's making statuary, which is fun. And then by the time that they got over with, everybody got to basically knock somebody out, and they looked good, and they melted away before anything else could happen. They ran back to the car and drove out. Unfortunately, the way things are in Iraq is a lot of people heard the explosion and life just continued. So that was that stint. So they got out of Makhet without any real problems, and eventually started going off to Tekret, which was the small town they were originally going for. Along the way, they were held up by a huge herd of sheep and goats. they didn't want to go around the sheep and goats, called cross-country style and everything, so Cyghost went astral, and which made her realize that those sheep and goats weren't there. They were an illusion. Originated from one of the sheep herders who was near the flock, who actually more appeared to be a younger girl. So she went back, told everybody the situation, and they're like, we're not dealing with her for the most part. Sentinel tried. Power blast, or repulsor blast. Pew, 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 pew. Completely missed. Horrible. So they're just like, this is ridiculous. We're getting out of here. They took off. Mostly the shenanigans, the way they took off was that the sheep and goats just suddenly started forming a giant amalgam humanoid over the sheep herder, made up of buying goats and sheep, standing 20 feet high of all this flock. They're just like, we're not dealing with that. Drove by. Then she went off and she went to explore around the countryside to try to get a hold of their quarry. She went through the town, which is small, only about 30 homes. And she did find the home because they knew what they had intel. They knew what the guy's residence was like. And they found a woman and a couple of children. They did not find Muhammad. So the Asin household was fine, but clear the quarry. So she went out of town and she started doing spirals. Her speed is fast enough that she could cover a lot of ground. And 5 miles away in a box canyon, she found evidence that Mr. Asin had been demonstrating his powers due to the pockmarked landscape. And he was there resting, as he had been exercising his powers. And he was sitting there just resting. So she flew back to the rest of the group and like, okay, we should go there. So they bypassed the town and went directly to the box canyon. They got out next to to Mr. Asin's battered moped and walked to the canyon, and they had Adam call out to him, which he did. They walked down to the point where they could see him and he could see them, and he challenged them. But what do they want? And they, again, in vague terms, said, hey, people are going to be looking for you. We're here to offer you a chance. And we want to at least make sure that you're not going to do the things that people are worried you're going to go do. And turns out that Muhammad is just a guy who didn't want these particular powers. He's not the kind of guy who wants to blow himself up and hurt other people. So he's got this power that he's trying to understand and come to grips with that he might need to use to defend himself. But he doesn't want to be a suicide bomber. He doesn't want to blow up and harm innocents. And he's kind of insulted that people assume that that's what he's going to do. It seems like whoever gave him that power also had that similar assumption, and he's kind of ticked about that. This turns out that's not that uncommon among the gifted, is that many of them think that their powers are either a joke or a sick, cruel insult. And that's kind of the case with Mr. Asin. So the group have kind of got back to each other, and they're like, this guy doesn't seem like he's a bad guy. He's pretty well adjusted and everything. So we're not exactly sure what's going on here. He's probably not a threat to anybody if we just walked out of here, and that could be our professional, what we tell them, that we don't think he's a danger. But as they were talking, Sentinel started hearing a noise that he'd heard before. He couldn't place it. Turned out that it was the sound of a jet in the up in the atmosphere. And as they were talking, he heard that noise again and got the tingly sensation. They all dove for cover as a series of explosions started ripping apart the ground around the canyon. These explosions damaged them all slightly, but they avoided the worst of it, having cover. Basically, the canyon served as a bit of a bunker. It turned out that Extra Crispy was able to invoke his ability. The explosion really didn't hurt him. There wasn't a great deal of shrapnel. And Mr. Asin blew himself up, which demonstrated his ability. It's kind of gross when a person explodes. There's bits all over the place. But he vanished. Gone. So the group kind of had to, well, what the heck's attacking us? They eventually got out of the canyon. The flyers started flying, and eventually their rolls were terrible for the perception. This jet had time to turn around and launch a couple of missiles. By the time they saw it, the missiles were already flying. So what basically happened next was a game of cat and mouse. The group had to deal with these missiles incoming because the jet was a high-altitude jet superiority fighter. It didn't have to come in close to start shooting at them. It was content to swing around, lock missiles onto its targeted area, and fire, and just let the missiles go. Now, they were able to observe the missiles and notice that they weren't locked onto a single target. They were being directed and making micro-course decisions. So they knew they weren't thermal tracking, so they couldn't distract them by using Extra Crispy. And they also kind of had some issues with trying to scrub them or scramble them. No Rook around to block all electronic signals or anything, so... Plus, they didn't know who this person was who was attacking them this time. But one thing was fairly clear. These missiles weren't directed for the party. They were going after Muhammad. And Cyghost tried to fly over to interdict the missiles. She's done this successfully before, but she's just not fast enough to get the kind of speed that you need to catch up to missiles that are flying ridiculously fast-fired missile speed. So she was effective against a few of the missiles. This took place over the course of several rounds. The plane came around and took another shot and then would fly around and come back, take a shot from the other direction. And for the most part, these were just missiles. So she was able to stop a few missiles, but the group had to figure out what they could do with Muhammad. Because while he reintegrated himself, it came around for another shot. And this time, he didn't have the ability to blow himself up. There must be some sort of a cooldown period on his ability. So what they did instead was Bulwark basically projected his force field in front of Muhammad, protecting him, not protecting himself, but protecting Muhammad. And for the most part, the bad luck continued to go with me as well, because these missiles weren't hitting. I was not rolling particularly well, and that was good for them, because I'm certain several of them would have been at least incapacitated, if not killed. Muhammad was knocked down by a near-fire missile and badly concussed. He was protected from being detonated because, well, that force field detonated the warhead before it actually hit Muhammad or the ground he was standing on. So he took the blast of it. But he's pretty hardy. One of his abilities is his body is supernaturally tough, too, much in the same way that Rook's is. So while he was stunned and they were standing around protecting him, their defense started to become a multi-layered approach. Bulwark was going to continue to hold his force field out, and Sentinel was going to stand in front of him using his own force shield to block more, and behind him was Extra Crispy, ready to pick up any blast and protect him with his own body if need be. This was a pretty noble approach and kind of a novel way of dealing with such a situation. Again, Cyghost could not hope to fly up and match the jet for speed, so she couldn't catch up to it, get into any kind of range to attack it. Instead, they were just basically waiting its payload out. They weathered 3 separate missile salvos, and the thing getting close enough to drop a cluster bomb on them, which they weathered all of this, although most of them are fairly badly dinged up. They eventually wanted to fight back, and again, Cyghost just couldn't get up to them. Bulwark couldn't fly fast enough to get to the jet, and he'd have to get into hand-to-hand range. It turns out that, well, strangely enough, their driver, Adam, actually had an anti-tank weapon in his car, used for long-distance removal of IEDs, improvised explosive devices. So Sentinel ran and got it. Here is this old-style 80s law rocket, a collapsible missile launcher. However, this is an anti-tank weapon, and again, it's questionable about even taking on most modern tanks. Good for taking on, armored personnel carriers or something like that against a main battle tank. It becomes a lot more dicey, but certainly not what you want to shoot at a plane with. So they weathered a strike from the cluster bombs, and Sentinel was rocked pretty hard. These things didn't need to worry a great deal about his amazing personal defenses. It was his body armor that protected him, but against the airburst, he didn't make that roll to tuck and cover. So he was hurt pretty badly, and he was mad. So he sat up, aimed the missile launcher, sighted in on what he thought was the jet, and fired. There were a couple significant problems with that. Number one, the jet was not the jet. The jet was Cy-Ghost, who was returning back to them. So once again, Cy-Ghost is the target of a missile. She had a chance to dodge out of the way. She did not do that. The missile had a 50-50 of blowing up on her because she's not a hard target. She's soft and not dense enough to trigger off the warhead. So it did not detonate on her. It merely broke her ribs and smashed into her midsection again. So she's left reeling and badly hurting from a direct strike from a missile. This is becoming a thing with her. She is still conscious. She's just badly hurt from this impact. It felt like getting hit by a car. The missile spiraled off and exploded. So she's not really happy with Sentinel right now. And she didn't even know where the missile came from. The other thing about those things is that when they launched, they have backblast. And they were in a combined box canyon. So the backblast actually finished the job of knocking out Sentinel. He's scorched. It turned out that Bulwark got a little singed. Nothing too terrible. And of course, the rest of it was sponged up by Extra Crispy. So it could have been worse. Muhammad was actually, he weathered the whole thing and came out of it all right. He got his feet under him and finally made his endurance test. It took me forever to make that. He got up and he was willing to get out with them. What really turned it around, though, is when the jets turned and after its cluster bomb attack got ready to come back, fired a few missiles, it got slammed with a missile that took out most of one of its wings. Turns out 3 Iraqi jet fighters were inbound and had fired at a long range. The pilot was good, though, and even with the loss of over half of one of its wings, it was able to turn and make a very hasty escape. His jet was faster than the Iraqis, and they pursued, which left the group alone. They're grateful for that. But it did chase off their attacker, which awfully useful. He only had a few more missiles and cluster bombs left anyhow. So, but it was at that time that they got some intervention, which was very welcome. So with a bit of a breather, they talked to Muhammad. They made him understand that what they were offering was a chance to get away because he was going to just endanger his homeland. People knew who he was, and this was a deliberate assassination attempt via jet and missile to take him out. It was important that they get him away so he isn't going to be a menace to his family anymore. He already had accepted that he was going to have to leave, but this was an avenue. The group seemed pretty decent about it, and they held off repeated missile strikes to kill him. Vouched for their character pretty darn well. And they were quite persuasive about things. Although, to be honest, he was a little bit stung because, well, some of the implications of what they said were a little on the harsh side, which is what got him angry with them in the first place. But eventually he saw that they were probably his best chance of getting out and not becoming somebody's weapon or a corpse. So they left in the battered car they came in on. The moped was destroyed. The car had its windows blown out by the airburst munitions, and the trunk was caved in because that's how Sentinel got into the trunk to get the rocket. But for the most part, they were able to drive out. And that's pretty much where we left off. But Muhammad is in tow, and for the most part, the group succeeded. They weathered yet another attack by a determined foe. Not a superhero foe. There's more than enough real-life threats. Whoever can back this jet coming this deep into Iraqi territory to try to assassinate someone, somebody's got some pull. They've got more questions to answer. So that's where we stand. The group is ready to head back out of Tikrit and get him off to Baghdad so they can fly away. They're going to have to get more tickets to get Muhammad out and pass any kind of security checkpoint, because they already know he's a person that the folk in charge really kind of want to question. And does the group dare to bring a living bomb with them onto an airplane? We'll see. As I said, Muhammad is pretty chill, and they seem to like him a fair amount, so despite the fact they can only talk to him through translator, through Adam. But everything seems to be pretty good. So we'll see what happens next time. Thank you for joining me. I'm Rob. This has been my State of the Dungeon address. Stay tuned, true believers. We will have more to this story. Farewell.